Perfect. And I've got my little microphone on, so we'll see if that helps. Okay, I'll be back. I'll be back. All right, so, hi you all. Thanks for being here. My name is Tom B. I'm your worm guy. I'm not a part of the garden per se. I run Old Tom's Wormery, but I give their worm talks because I love these little guys, right? I love you guys too, but hey, worms first. Expected for, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13 people, which is wonderful. I'm glad to see you guys starting to do worms. I have a website of Old Tom's Wormery. Feel free to poke around in there. Also, I love questions. So when you finish here and you go home and you do some of this at your house and you go, call me, email me. I love questions because I find that we learn more by teaching. So when I see you guys and I'm here to teach you, I will learn at least 3 or 4 things from you today. Cool. So this is their agenda and itinerary, probably syllabus. I also fill in around there. I'm a very loosey-goosey trainer on this because worms are not specific and they're not really complicated. They're simple and it's hard for you to screw up. There's one screw up that everybody does and you'll work at it. Go ahead.
What type of worms are these? Are these earthworms?
She's asking what kind of worms these are. What I teach are red wigglers. It's called Insinia foteda, which everybody butchers the Latin. And the hand signs for that, I actually have hand signs for a few things. This is an earthworm. It comes up out of the dirt. This is a composting worm. It crawls across the top of the dirt, eating the compost, the little leaves and such on the top of the ground that go kind of soft. And so they eat that. My red wigglers don't go deep. So when you say earthworm, people will get confused. And really you say red wiggler for these worms.
Where can I get a 12-foot worm?
A 12-foot worm. He's seen that on the internet. It comes out of Australia, I believe.
I saw it.
Yep.
It's either Australia or I heard someone say the Amazon. I believe both of those answers could be true.
But be careful, you might be in the Florida Everglades and those are boa constrictors. Okay, that's one of my helpers. She found a roly-poly, also known as an isopod. If you find any of those in your bin, they're good guys. All right, let's see how far along on this I can get. Page 1, the class structure, the materials needed, the introduction. They do a lot of stuff that's very group-oriented of what's your name, what's your favorite animal, and we all know it's worm, and what superpower you have. Your superpower is you're going to make worms happy, okay? I've had that superpower for about 15 years, so I know a lot of stuff, but there's always more to learn. So if you ever hit a point where you're wondering, how do I do this? We talk among worm people and we help each other. And then we also come to Tom because Tom says sometimes the stuff you learn on the internet, kind of iffy. Okay, so if your worms aren't doing good, even though you did all the stuff you learned on the internet, call me, email me. All right, you did survey work, that's good. Our objectives today is to learn how vermicomposting works, and in the end you're going to build a bin to take home. 4 of you will go home with worms, and the others that signed up later, we will get you worms either later today or in the next week, okay? Background knowledge. So somebody here, you guys, are regular worm composters? You have worms at home? You have worms? You guys? No worms at all, no worm knowledge. Have you learned anything about growing worms on the internet?
Yeah, well, I mean, I've done compost piles and I've
Okay, so this will reflect composting,
Yeah.
but there's a few things that you want in hot composting that you don't want in worm
I
composting.
learned a little bit from here. I come here on Thursdays with Recovery Cafe.
So her Thursday classes, good. All right, and worm experience over here?
Yes.
Yay, good, good.
From the
Yep. All right.
I'm here because I don't want to kill them.
She doesn't want to kill her worms, and she's hoping I can help her not kill her worms. All right. They talk about how many types of worms they are. We talked the broad earthworms versus compost worms. They actually have 3 names for the type of worm, and I'm afraid I don't remember. It's like mesos and endo. Anyways, the way they divide up worms is how deep they go in the ground. Some worms live way deep down in the ground. They mostly only poke their head up to grab, say, a leaf, and they pull that back down to their burrow. Okay? Others live near the surface. They can break soil some, but they mostly come up to get the compost off the top. Our worms are completely surface worms. They go, they say, up to 8 inches deep, which is about right from my experience. They're just eating the compost right off the top, which shows up when we make our bin, we make our bedding. You can throw in maybe a handful of soil, and that's for grit and for the microbiology, but that handful of soil is all these red wigglers need. They don't need soil, they don't want soil. They want compost. Yeah, all right. Intro questions about superpowers. They talk about superpowers here in their other classes because we were talking about the superpower of the worms. I've seen this, it's really kind of neat. When I do regular composting and I've got regular compost sitting there, it looks like compost for weeks and weeks and weeks. When I add earthworms to compost, it actually breaks down further. The worms do miraculous work breaking down the little woody chips even, but the leaf bits and the cardboard and the food scraps, their superpower is turning compostables and food waste and what have you into black gold. Black gold is our vermicompost. I brought along a sample of the finished vermicompost. I'm gonna let you guys pass it around, dig your fingers in it a little bit, and you'll see how well broken up. All of this used to be cardboard and banana peels and some avocado and asparagus. My worms eat really, really good because I'm near a vegetable wholesaler, and so all those boxes and boxes and boxes of vegetables he throws away, I go and grab some to feed my worms.
Is it edible?
It would be edible, but he's giving it to me for free, so I tend it's not harmful. I've got video on my phone of people eating the worms. Because when I give some of my talks, I bring my eat a worm sign, and some people actually eat a worm. Most people just eat the gummy worms. All right, so pass that along. Just touch it with your fingers so you understand it's certainly not harmful. It makes me crazy because kids today are too darn clean. They need to be exposed to some dirt for their health. It helps set up their microbiome inside. Well, the worm microbiome is like that. First of all, it's fairly healthy. I don't know of any data that says we need, in particular, those microbes, but I think they would be healthy for a human. It makes me crazy when I give a talk in a kindergarten class. I talk about how important it is for kids to touch dirt and to touch the worms and to experience the microbes. And the kindergarten teachers, for the safety of the kids, they go, oh, isn't that nice? Okay, kids, let's all go to the sanitizing station, and they sanitize their fingers. And I wish they wouldn't do that. I wish they would experience, live with, and actually consume, enjoy, and share some of the microbiome with the worms. I mentioned the black gold. That we're passing around is called black gold because it's a wonderful dark compost, very well broken down. It's very low in NPK. NPK are the numbers you see on fertilizer. Nitrogen, potassium, and phosphorus, or phosphorus and potassium. So the vermicompost is really typically 100, 120. It's always really, really low because we're not looking for the worm compost for the nutrients. What we're looking for is their microbiome. Plants and trees have lived with worms for a long, long time. You know, I ask people how often, because we make compost out of things like horse manure. Well, out in the forest, how often does a tree see a horse manure? Almost never, right? Cow manure, almost never. Here deep in the city, the human manure sometimes, but not very often. But how often do they see a worm poop? Pretty darn often, okay? And so that microbiome is shared between the worms and the trees and the plants. The microbiome of a worm helps the plants pick up the nutrients. And so with our soil here in Santa Clara Valley, it's very fertile. It's improved by adding the microbiome of the vermicompost. And so that's what we're learning to do, is we're making vermicompost to add to our garden in bits. Okay? We have a question over here.
So the dirt is the worm's poop?
The bag that we passed around is the worm's poop. And that there, it's delicious. It's delicious. Would you like a forkful? No? It won't hurt you. The only things that have gone in there have been organic things. And by organic, I mean things like cardboard, leaves, eggshells, and all the fruits and vegetables. Yes?
Last night I was repotting my plant
Uh-huh.
and I had a worm
Yay! So last night she was repotting her plants and she found a worm in the pot. We don't find worms in the pot very often because it's too small,
in.
right?
My pot was a little bit.
It was a little bit bigger. In the bin, the worm is the alpha predator. The worm is in there eating all the other microbes that are in there, breaking down the leaves and cardboard and such. In the pot, probably still an alpha predator, but not a wonderful environment for them. With these worms, when you take them and put them into the garden, they stop being the alpha predator and they start being a snack. So out in the garden, they rejoin the circle of life because they're very soft and apparently tasty. My chickens think they're wonderful. Like I said on my camera, I've got videos of people eating the worms. They didn't think they were tasty. Apparently they tasted like dirt. I haven't been brave enough to try that yet.
I wonder if you put some lemon and salt on it.
And some tequila has been suggested. And in the tequila bottle, it's a different kind of worm. All right. We talked about the casting having the wonderful bacteria. We talk about those bacteria, the microbiome being wonderful in the worm's digestive system. The nifty thing is they find that the worms kill the bad bugs that go into the bin. So they actually did testing with salmonella and listeria, and they got a 6 to 9 log decrease in the bad bacteria. And by log, they mean times 10. So 1 log is times 10, 2 log is times 10 times 10, so times 100. And so this was a 6 and 9 log reduction in the bad bugs. And so it's kind of wonderful.
And that was just by adding worms.
That was just by having worms eat it, yep. That will show up in the liquids that come out later. We'll talk about the worm tea versus leachate. All right. We also want to mention that we increase the soil's ability to retain moisture by breaking down that organic stuff and make it into a little less hydrophobic. Our soils around here tend to be hydrophobic, or we're very clay soil. And so this helps the organic material get into the soil and helps spread that goodness around.
That's what the earthworms are good for.
The earthworms are good for that. And if you can get earthworms, that's wonderful. But our soil doesn't tend to have earthworms. And so when people get a hold of me and say, I want to put worms in my garden, I usually discourage them. If you have been putting in compost and mulch for years and your soil is softened up real nice and you water like a crazy person, you might be able to keep worms around here. I wish we had soil like, I guess, Pennsylvania, where it's deep, moist soil all year long. Then they'd have worms in their soil. But then you have to put up with winter. And here we don't have winter, thank goodness. All right, worm bin exploration. Oh boy, they have all kinds of wonderful data here Like there's 9,000 species of worms. Even among the red wigglers, there are probably a half dozen that get the common name red wiggler. Mine, I'm pretty sure, are Insenia fetida because they have the right number of little, the right number of these stripes, right? Those are bands on their segments of the worm. Well, in front of this part, if you have a certain number, that helps define the species. And my little red wigglers, they also have a yellow tail. And so it's kind of sweet to see their little yellow tail. There's the old wives' tale about when you cut a worm in half and you get two worms. Not this kind of worm, okay? If you cut the tail off this worm, it might grow back or you might kill your worm, okay? They don't have lungs, okay? In our picture of the worms here, you can see we've got the mouth and the pharynx where we hold food. We've got, it comes down to where there's a crop, and that again holds food just before it goes into the gizzard. Worms don't have teeth. They have a gizzard like a chicken does. And the gizzard has grit in there, and the chicken and the worm grinds their food with those little tiny rocks in their gizzard. That's how they chew. We give them eggshell or oyster shell or the garden lime, and that gives them some grit for their gizzard. Usually those, I've got a question, let me get this one. What's your question? What's a gizzard? Gizzard, we used to get more of this with our chickens when we bought a chicken to cook. They would give you all the little heart and the liver and all those parts, the internal parts. The gizzard is up in the worm about here, and that's where they've got a muscle. And they take little bits of sand or eggshell and they use that to chew their food. Okay? And you can see it right here in the picture where they eat some and it goes down a little ways, and that's where the gizzard is. Okay? And when you get into high school in a science class and you dissect the worm, you'll remember this. I hope. And hopefully it was good knowledge. All right. The other thing we're got coming from the worms, we talk about the humic acids that these guys help to generate. I don't know the science of that. The portion of that I do know is we feed them a lot of eggshells and oyster shells and other calcium-containing grit, because that gives them grit for their gizzard, like we talked about. It gives them some pH. Life is by its nature very acidic. I'll be there. Okay. And so the calcium in the eggshell and in the oyster shell and in the lime, that helps neutralize that acid. But that calcium is also really important for the plants. And so the worm is a very calcium-based critter. When it poops tend to be covered with they excrete a lot of calcium. And that's in a form that the plants can take up. So the worms are important for the plant's calcium uptake too. Question?
My question is, so if I put the eggshells in and they're not finely ground, can the worms still get to them okay?
Okay, she's asking about the size that you grind the eggshells down. And if you put an eggshell into your worm bin, you will get an eggshell out. Okay? If you take the eggshell and you do this to grind the eggshell, you will get chunks of eggshell out. What I do for my eggshells is I run them through a coffee grinder. Okay? The fun part about that is back in the old days, cowboys used to boil their coffee in just a pot and it just boiled. To make the coffee grounds settle, they would add eggshell. And that clumps together the grounds and they drop out, and so you can pour off your coffee without so much grounds in it. So when you grind your eggshells in your coffee grinder, next time you're making cowboy coffee. You can also use your blender. If you use your blender, you probably want to add some water and then the eggshells so that it can move. If you grind dry eggshells, you will burn up your blender. Okay?
Maybe you could go to the secondhand store and get a grinder.
Yep. I love the secondhand store for coffee grinders and blenders. I love the secondhand store.
We found that little kids love grinding eggshells like more than any other process in building the worm bin.
And little kids love grinding the eggshells around here because they give them a mortar and pestle.
Yeah.
And so it turns out you can get their little exercise in, wear them out, burn off eating that gummy bear we talked about, that gummy worm that we talked about. They got to burn up those calories. We actually don't have a worm bin active over here. Oh, we do, behind me.
do.
Duh. Thank you, Kiki.
Though they're kind of in funky shape. I'd like to hear your thoughts on them again.
All right, so behind me and below the screen probably, we have some of the stacking bins, okay? Some people, they buy this bin and then they take the class. The stacking bin has layers of worms, usually layers of worms, except for when they're ignored for too long, and then all the worms have used up. So I'm not seeing many worms. We'll talk about this style. It's really very convenient to have these bins here, because then I can talk about the style of worm bin that we're making versus the style that this is. Okay? So,
Yeah, I think that one has the worms in it.
we have a few. All right. I'm grabbing the tray from their can of worms. The can of worms is a round one. It's been around for years and years, made by the Australians. And you can see we actually have a worm. These haven't been getting much attention, and so you can see it's mostly just the bedding. A little bit of torn cardboard, a little bit of torn newspaper. I think I saw a piece of junk mail in here earlier, but they haven't been adding much by way of food. And so worms need both the bedding, which is carbon, right? Anything full of carbon like paper or sawdust or peat moss or cocoa coir, in regular composting, this would be a brown, okay? And then your food scraps, anything edible, that's full of nitrogen, and that's your greens. And so clearly these haven't been getting greens very much. And amusingly, the brownest green that you probably have contact with all the time is coffee grounds. Coffee grounds don't look green, but it's a plant seed, right? And that plant seed is full of proteins for the little baby plant. And proteins are very much made of nitrogen, and that's what we're trying to feed to balance the carbons of this bedding.
Is it a problem with the ink on the newspaper versus...
So he's asking about the ink, and it's one of my favorite subjects. On newspaper, the ink is all soy-based. So the ink is all very safe. Even the little bits of color ink, it's all very safe. And my favorite example of how you know it's safe is I want you to picture your box of Cheerios. Bright yellow, right?
Yeah.
But you hand that to your baby to pour their own Cheerios. If there was anything toxic in that paint, they would have been sued off the planet. So that tells you most of the stuff that we touch, it's all safe for worms, okay? And it's safe for us. The one thing is that paint is on there to be a little water resistant. And so when you tear up that Cheerios box and put it in your worm bin, that piece of cardboard will last a little longer than all the others, because the water can only get at it from the inside, not from the yellow outside. But I'm not in a hurry. The worms tell me how slow to go.
What's the green to carbonate brown ratio?
Oof, I am not good at that. She's asking about the carbon nitrogen ratio, the browns to green ratio. And I try not to teach that. It shows up as the question, how much do I feed my worms? And I can't tell you that, because it turns out I don't know what you eat. I don't know how much food waste you generate. I don't know if you mow the lawn and want to use your lawn clippings. I can't know that. And so what I tell you is that the worms have to teach you. And so after you get your bin set up, and we're typically setting up a square bin, what you do is to start feeding the first month or 3 is I want you to feed to the corners. So the first feeding, you'll drop in one corner. The next feeding, you'll drop in another corner. The third feeding, you'll put in the third corner, the fourth feeding, fourth corner, and the fifth feeding, you'll go back and look at that first corner and you see how the worms are doing. So that's really to know how much to feed these worms.
And how often should you be putting food?
And how often do we put in the food? And I'm again telling you, the worms will tell you. I've got people that say, okay, well, it's 2 o'clock, time for a feeding, and then 3 o'clock. And by the time they get to the fifth corner, the worms haven't done much, and so they learn to slow down. I had a guy just last week who's saying, well, once a month. And I go, that to me feels slow, but I don't know. Could be okay. Depends on what he's feeding. I'm assuming he's going to speed up, but also as the worms populate the bin and the population goes up, the food will go faster. And after a few months, when you're comfortable with how much the worms have taught you to feed them, you don't have to do the corner thing anymore. You can just feed them. Okay? Question?
Do you leave everything alone, or do you mix anything in?
So she's asking how much mixing we do and how much layering we do and how much we handle the worms. And if you go online, you'll find people that say, ooh, your fingers are covered with salts and oils. Baloney. My fingers aren't poison. I play with my worms all the time. You don't have to. There's people also say that if you leave the worms alone, you get better breeding. I'm afraid I don't know that because I play with my worms all the time. So when anyone tells you to put it on in layers, that's fine. Make them happy. Put it on in layers. The next time you play with it and stir it, the layers all go away. And so my advice is I stir a lot. I play a lot. What that gives me a chance to do is when I'm playing in the bin and I find a big lump of something, I tend to break up the lumps and throw it back in there. And in the end, you saw how my compost is really smooth, right? A lot of vermicompost has lumps and chunks of cardboard. When you put this in your garden and you water a little bit of the cardboard will peek out. Don't worry about it. Just think of it as mulch, okay? Because even though this I'm saying is 100% castings, well, every little bit of poop in the world has a little bit of fiber left in it. Not just worms. All right. So we're talking about the bed itself. So our example is this not very well broken down can of worms layer, and they talk about taking a sniff. Not bad. So luckily this has been exposed to worms. Here we go, I'm on camera. This has been exposed to worms, and I'm gonna have you take a quick sniff, and you'll see even though there's been some food in here, it smells like pretty much nothing. Okay.
Wet newspaper.
I'm going to hand this to you. You can pass it along.
Yeah, that's right.
And so as they pass it along, what they're finding is it just smells a little bit like wet newspaper, dirt, soil. Likewise, the vermicompost, as that came around, you'll notice nobody went, ew, even though it's poops. Luckily, vermicompost doesn't smell, so you can keep this in your house. My favorite story for that was, of course, early on, I kept my worm bins in my wife's exercise room. And she went in there, she was dedicated, so she was in there just about every day, and she didn't know there were worms in there until a couple of months later when she saw me feeding them. And she said, what's that? And so that's the nice part about how worms and their castings, they don't stink. They don't have to stink. If they stink, okay, I'll be right there, okay? If they stink, it means usually it's too wet. If it's too wet, oxygen can't get in. That's called anaerobic. Aerobic is with oxygen. So if it goes anaerobic, bad bugs grow and they stink. And so if your bin starts to stink, you fluff it and add dry paper to soak up the extra wet. Question over here. Question?
I'm sorry. I thought she had a question.
What was her, she was?
No, she said I found a roly-poly.
She found a roly-poly. Yay. One of our younger audience here has found a roly-poly, and you know that roly-polies and worms are friends. So if you find roly-polies in your bin, that's a good thing. Roly-polies help break down the hard things like sticks that worms can't quite get to. So we're talking about the amount of... Oh, Another question. Yep.
I opened my bin the other day and I think there was a cockroach.
Ah, lucky winner over here found a cockroach in her bin. We're going to find all kinds of critters in there. This time of year, they're looking for that moisture. And what we use for cockroaches and any bugs that we want to get rid of, this would include the roly-polies if you don't like them, is a material called diatomaceous earth, DE. DE is the skeletons from microscopic little phytoplankton that were in the ocean. Billions and trillions and gazillions of those guys lived in the ocean. When they died, they settled to the bottom and made huge layers of their little skeletons. Their little skeletons are little silica needles. And so they dig up those skeletons, they grind them to a powder, they sell them to you in the hardware store, the big box store, and you sprinkle it on. You can sprinkle it into your worm bin because worms have got a soft skin. Okay? DE gets into the joints of the insects that have a hard shell. So like cockroaches and the roly-polies and trying to think what other bad bugs would be in there. If you found ants, there's better ways to deal with ants. You don't get them very often, don't worry about it. But they have a hard shell, an exoskeleton, and so the DE would get into their joints and apparently dries them out so they die. And so when you do the DE, because clearly you're going to go down to the local store and get a bag, you sprinkle it on lightly, and then every couple of days you sprinkle it on lightly. And so because DE needs to be dry to do its thing, and so you put on just a little bit over the top, you don't stir it in, and as they walk across it, they get the DE on them, it gets into their joints and it does its job.
So is that something I actually work with?
Oh no, DE is just safe. Don't breathe it, it is a powder, but luckily it's no, don't breathe it. Don't be crazy. If you like to wear a mask, fine. I'm very casual about stuff. I will probably at some point in my life find that I've been exposed to too many of the vitamin W worm. We'll see. Okay, another question?
What does DE stand for again?
Diatomaceous earth. These were the little phytoplankton or whatever, they're called diatoms. So DIATOM and then EOUS, diatomaceous. If you can get diatomaceous into your Google, it'll go there. All right, next we're finally getting to the amount of moisture that should be in a worm bin. And so what we teach is called the squeeze method. The squeeze method is you take a handful, worms and all, okay, worms and all, and you give it a squeeze like a firm handshake. So when you give it a squeeze like a firm handshake, you should see a drop or two of water come out, okay? Luckily, worms are very flexible. If you get a lot of drips, you'll be fine. If you get a stream, your bin will go anaerobic. And so you're looking for those few drops. If you don't get any, you're gonna add some water to the bin. If you get too much, right, you're gonna add dry material, like some pieces of dry cardboard that you tear up. Okay, and the dry cardboard soaks up the extra liquids that are in there, and those extra liquids are all full of nutrition for the worms, and they help break down the cardboard, and so it's this really wonderful effect of you're adding cardboard to make the moisture right, but by that way you're adding more food for the worms.
I have a question. So, since our worm bins aren't huge, if it's like a little bit too wet, can you just let it air out for a few days and then?
You can let it air out. That's another way to dry it. If you're doing that, also fluff it. Because the top layer will dry out some, especially here in California where it's kind of dry in the air. So it will dry and you fluff, and it'll dry and you fluff. Likewise, if it's too dry, if you go on the internet, they will tell you get one of those mister bottles like this, like that. And so they go and stir and stir and stir. And it's not a very fast way to add water. I use a water hose. I just go spritz and stir, spritz and stir until I get to the right amount of liquid. Okay, and if you find that you added too much water, add cardboard. You'll go back and forth. The worms will teach you their right level, and how much you need to add water each time. You'll get better over time. You'll become this expert.
What about moist foods like cucumber?
That's a wonderful way to add liquid to your bin. In fact, I taught that at one point, so thank you for reminding me. He's asking about moist foods like cucumbers, pumpkin coming up soon here with a Halloween, watermelon. I don't tend to do red tomatoes because tomatoes have got a lot of seeds. Okay, so if you cook your tomatoes, then you can adds lots of nice moisture to the bin. So wet foods is a wonderful way to wet your bed. Okay?
What's wrong with the seeds?
They sprout in your garden. And even roses, when they grow in the wrong place, are a weed. And so in your garden, occasionally when you add compost, you get seeds. They're either weeds or maybe vegetables, but in the wrong place, every vegetable is a weed. In hot composting, the goal is to get the material up to 130 degrees plus. That pasteurizes it and kills off those weed seeds. We don't want our worm bin getting up much past 90, ish degrees. And so that's not enough to kill anything. And so if you put seeds into your worm compost, you can get seeds to come out. What's interesting is I did some this morning. And when you've got broccoli, those are the flower heads of the broccoli plant. And so they actually have seeds in there. And so I get broccoli seeds come up in my worm bin, but luckily they come up right away. And so they get stirred in and the worms eat them, and I don't end up with broccoli seeds in my compost when I'm done. I got lucky on that because my source of vegetables has a lot of broccoli. All right. So we talked about what it smells like. We talked about seeing the bedding, which is cardboard and paper and peat moss. They're breaking it down. They actually mentioned the sprouted seeds. How cute. We talked about the amount of wetness and how to correct that. And we talked about all the other bugs you're going to see in there. You will see those little pincer bugs.
Yeah.
They don't hurt anybody. You will see slugs, snails and slugs. Back east, they get these tiny little snails. And I don't want to take my compost with snails and put that in my garden. So I treat my bins when I find snails. You'll go get that organic snail treatment, and it's got iron phosphate in there is what kills the snail. Well, the iron phosphate to the worm is just fertilizer. So if you treat your bin for snails using that organic version with the iron phosphate, the worms will be fine and you'll get rid of your snails. Yeah, snails and slugs. There. One of my favorites is that when you get flies, since we have rotten food going in the bin, you will get flies. I teach dry layer as a way to stop flies. And so, I don't see an example of a good worm blanket, so we're going to say that in our case, this is our worm blanket. Okay? We have a worm bed there, and every bed should have a blanket. Okay? When all my bins have got a worm blanket. I love the worm blanket. It helps keep the moisture down in the bed. With the bins that we're setting you guys up, which is the black bin with the yellow lid, a really convenient worm blanket is a kitchen garbage bag. Those tall white bags that go into tall kitchen garbage are just the right size to lay out as a worm blanket. People use cardboard, cut the size, paper, cut the size, newspaper. I don't like the paper and the cardboard or even most cloth because it goes rotten. And so you end up with rotten bits. My favorite worm blanket is an old baby blanket. Those are made of polyester, so if you're anti-plastic, maybe. But I find they last forever. They help hold the moisture in, but they also breathe. And this morning I was playing with one of my worm blankets, and there are worms crawling in through the worm blanket. So when you get flies, on top of that worm blanket, you put shredded newspaper. What goes on with a fly is they find that nice moist food in there, and they lay their eggs. And the eggs grow into the worm larva that's crawling around there, the grub that's in there, the maggot, and they then pupate, and then when they mature, the mature fly flies away to mate, and then comes back to lay eggs again. And so what we do to beat that is we use a dry layer. On top of the worm blanket, we just take anything nice and fluffy, like shredded newspaper, and we put a layer, the dry layer, right on top. And so that way, when the fly comes back to lay her eggs, all she sees, because she can crawl out through the dry layer, but when she comes back, all she sees is a dry layer, and she doesn't lay eggs. And that's a nice natural way to get rid of flies. Around here, they've been teaching dry layer, but they're not saying why. So a lot of people keep a dry layer all the time. I'm too lazy for that. I put on a dry layer when I get flies. The nice part about this dry layer is that as soon as the flies are gone, you can just stir it right in and it becomes part of your bedding. I do it on top of the worm blanket because that helps the dry layer to stay dry. If you put your dry layer on top of the wet bed, your dry layer will get wet and it's not as effective. Where are we in our script? We are to, we got more questions, and then on the script I see building a bin. So we'll talk about building the bin. So questions here. Oh, you got a mouthful. And questions here.
They are just wondering, so like if you put the plastic, they don't need like aeration.
So she's wondering about the plastic worm blanket.
Yeah.
And very nicely, it's not sealed. It's a whole lot like the lid of the bin. So when we drop the lid on of the bin, it's not very airtight and we're fine. And so likewise, if you use a plastic bag as your worm bin, it will be fine. What's fun is that a lot of people like using bubble wrap, and they talk about how the bubble, the worms like to be up in the bubbles. And I think it's more a case of just people like bubble wrap. So if you can find bubble wrap, it's a nice worm blanket. All right, another question.
When do we know that there's too many worms and we can collect some and give them to our neighbor?
We love that question. He's wondering, how do we know when we have too many worms? How do we control the number of worms? The nice part is we don't have to control the number of worms. They do what's called self-regulate, okay? By self-regulate, when there's too many worms, they slow down their egg laying. And I brought for you guys some cocoons, because when we see that the worms are breeding, they lay their eggs in little yellow balls that are actually a cocoon that holds eggs. And it's a little yellow ball that looks like a little yellow lemon maybe, and as it gets more mature it turns into a red and then into a brown before they then hatch out. So I'm going to pass this around and you can hopefully spot the little yellow balls in there. And the cocoons are kind of funny because you won't see them and you won't see them and you won't see them. Even though you've seen them here, it'll help. You won't see them, and then you'll notice one. And your eye becomes magically adjusted and you'll go, oh, there's one, and there's another, and there's another. And suddenly you'll be able to see cocoons. So you'll have a glance at them today. Hold in mind that your miracle of being able to see cocoons, it's coming. You'll get there. All right. Yep.
All those cocoons came from one of your beds, just one bed?
All those cocoons came from just one bed. And it's funny because some people in my business are really good at generating cocoons. They have just the right bedding and just the right timing and just the right number of worms to put in there. I still do worm farming as an art. which really is just a hobby, which means that luckily my worms breed happy enough. And luckily this morning I found a bin that had a lot of cocoons in it, so I could select out some cocoons for you to see. And whoever is lucky in this crowd will throw those cocoons into their bin that they put together, and they'll hatch out in about 21 days, by about 21 days, and you'll have new little tiny baby worms. Little tiny baby worms are called wisps. So W-I-S-P, wisp. They're sweeter than... and I don't like to rub them off my hand because I don't want them to get hurt. And so when I have a wisp somewhere and I want them to go back into the bin, what I do is I gently reach in and I touch the wisp and it sticks to my finger, and then I go flick, and he flicks back into the bin. And as a professional, they tell me I'm not supposed to worry about every single little one worm. I can't help it. I love these little guys.
And typically, how many worms come out of one cocoon?
Typically, they say it's anything from 1 to 7 worms come out of a cocoon. And so typically I would expect maybe up to 3. There's interesting stories of in the springtime, after they've been dormant all winter long, real often you get 1. And where did the others go? We think there was possibly a battle royale inside the cocoon. In the book Jaws 2, that's what sharks do.
Thank God that's not what babies do. But then I hear like when twins, triplets, like they're like fighting for the nutrition.
Humans, hopefully, are a little friendlier. We don't come out with
Thank God
little.
babies aren't like that.
Or maybe that's why our human babies are born with no teeth. Okay, we're going to talk about building the bin because it'll be hard to talk to you individually. So I'm going to walk through as we build the bin what we're going to do, and then we'll go and build one, and we'll again repeat the instructions. We are setting you up with a bin of these are your typical black bin with a yellow lid. It's my favorite, but any plastic pardon that car. We always say we're using a Rubbermaid tub. Well, this is not Rubbermaid. Any brand would work. We want them to be light proof. I've never done it with a see-through bin, so I can't say, but the common knowledge is they want the darkness, and so we don't use a see-through bin. And so I tell people, in my experience, this is the 14-gallon bin. I find that one is a really nice size. This is biology. Size matters, okay? With larger size, you get better diversity and better stability, and it's just easier to grow. If your bin isn't going to move, it's going to find its spot and stay there, scale up to the 27-gallon. It's better for the worms, okay? 14-gallon or 17-gallon makes it easy to move the bin around. At 27 gallons, it gets kind of heavy and hard to move. So, these bins with their yellow lid, we are going to drill some holes in them. If you go online, you'll see they say drilling holes in the top, drilling holes in the bottom, and I'm telling you, don't do that. If you drill holes in the top, rainwater gets in, and it makes your bed wet, makes the worms unhappy. If you drill holes in the bottom, icky stuff leaks out. And at my house, Amanda, the loving wife, she gets mad. You don't want the icky stuff leaking out. And if you read online, they say drill holes in the bottom and then put another bin underneath it. That's just to catch the icky stuff. We don't want that icky stuff. Instead, we drill our holes in the side. In the side, the air flows in and out. And my understanding is that what we're doing with the holes in the side isn't so much to get oxygen in, because this yellow lid is not airtight. What I think we're doing when we drill the holes in the side is we're letting the CO2 out. All these bugs and the worms and what have you are in there breathing in and out. They're breathing out CO2. CO2 is a heavy gas. It gets stuck in the bin. And so we're drilling holes. I tend to drill them down near the bottom. And even when that hole is covered with compost, the CO2 gets to leak out a little bit. These little bins, it's not critical. People use these bins with no holes. But I watched a guy try using a full garbage can, and all of his worms died until we drilled holes down near the bottom so the CO2 could get out. So that was my proof that CO2 thing. So we'll be using a drill to just poke some holes, and you'll ask me how many, and the right answer is yes. Okay, like I said, some people do no holes because it's a shallow pan. Some people do dozens and dozens of holes, and I guess they really love to drill. Make it artistic. 4 or 5 holes, a dozen holes, you'll be fine. One side, all 4 sides, doesn't matter. That does, though, bring me to the talk about the holes in the bottom. People talk about when they've got the holes in the bottom and that stuff leaks out. That used to be called worm tea. And worm tea was a miracle of gardening. It's wonderful. And some government bureaucrat decided that if you put a piece of food in there and it's got salmonella on that food, the salmonella could come out with that. And so they changed the name from worm tea. They now call that leachate. And they want you to be careful about the leachate. So if the liquid comes out by itself, don't spray that on your food. Okay, so if you're gonna use that stuff, and it makes me crazy, people online will say, oh, danger, flush it and bleach the toilet, and that's crazy talk. It's not dangerous in the bin, it shouldn't be dangerous coming out, but we do treat it with respect. If it's leaching out, then put it on your lawn, don't put it on your lettuce, okay? Put it on the ground around your apple trees. Don't use it as a foliar spray. That just leached out. Use it safely. Worm tea, you actually brew. You take some of the compost and you put that in water. If you just take it and put it into water, it makes an extract like the tea we drink. Use that quickly because it is going to go anaerobic, so don't store that. Just make your extract and use it right away. You can also make a worm tea that is a brewed tea, and that's where you're taking that compost, you're putting it into the water, and you're putting an air stone in there to bubble it real hard. And that bubbling real hard helps the microbes to knock off the compost. And then you add things like molasses and kelp and fish hydrolysate and all these things to feed the bacteria and make them multiply. And then they've got timing online of do this 24 hours, do this with the good bubbling to make this wonderful worm tea. And too much work for Tom. I use an extract. Makes everybody happy, spreads the microbes around a little more. And so that's when we're setting up our bin. So we now have our bin, we have our holes in it. We will be taking some newspaper around here that will shred. I get to give you the clue on newspaper.
Should your lid also snap shut?
She's asking how tightly should you keep the bin snapped shut, and a whole lot of my bins have no lid. Okay?
I have like kind of a jar.
Yeah. Hers, she keeps a jar so it can breathe a little more. And like we talked about, it's not airtight. So I think a whole lot of whether you have it closed or not closed, a lot of that is just, does it make you happy? There is one thing that goes on though. If your bed is pretty wet, with the bedding down there and all that life going on, the walls will get wet. And wet walls let worms wander. Okay? When you go into your bin, you'll see a lot of little black specks on the walls. That's where a worm was crawling by and booped a little as he went. So that shows you that the worms were crawling on the walls, and even though they were crawling on the walls, they didn't crawl out. Well, sometimes just before it rains, or if there's something bad goes on in the bin, you added too much food and overheats, or something salty got in there, the worms will crawl out. They'll try to crawl away. Usually you'll find them a couple feet away, dried into what's called worm jerky. Throw them back in your bin, the other worms will eat them. If you see the occasional worm crawling out, that's normal. There's always the adventurous few. You know, they gotta go exploring, that's what makes the world great. If a bunch of them come out, deal with your bin. Figure out what's going on in your bin. A lot of people, when they just start, they put in their worms and the worms all crawl out. And what they'll tell you online is to turn on a light overhead. Worms don't like light. That helps push them back down in the bedding. The other thing that I've found is that it usually happens when you're starting, because you're starting with clean paper or pure coco coir or peat moss. It doesn't have any microbes on it. There's nothing for the worms to eat, and so they come crawling out looking for something to eat. If you were watching this from home, I would tell you make your bedding a few days ahead of time, and when you go to wet the bedding, take that first little fist-sized piece of food that you wanted to give them, run that through the blender with some water, use that as your first wetting. So when you're wetting the bedding, that now water will be full of little tiny specks of food, and they break down real quickly and generate the microbes for the worms to hunt and helps them stay in the bin. Today we're just using water. Luckily, when you go home with my worms, they come in a little bit of compost for them to eat. I haven't heard any of my people complain about the worms crawling out right away. I think it's because there's lots of microbes on the compost that you get your worms with. If you order online, real often they ship in pure peat moss. It's a little dry, and that's to keep the worms safe from the heat. The peat moss doesn't heat up as much in the back of the post office truck. And so that's why when you get them online, sometimes they come in dry peat. They shrink a little bit. As soon as you add water, they swell back up. But it's just a variation on how we ship. I send them to you in compost, the worms are happier. They send them to you in dry peat moss, the worms are safer. And so, once we get the bin drilled, we'll throw in some paper. And I wanted to show you, other than where the paper is folded, that typically paper has a direction for tearing. If you, this is the Mercury News, if you tear the Mercury News side to side, you end up with these little bits like that, and it just comes right off like that. If you go top to bottom, you get these nifty long strips, and it's just a whole lot more satisfying. What's interesting is that the Palo Alto Weekly goes the other direction. The Palo Alto Weekly tears side to side. So when you're home, you'll be doing this. If you can get your hands on some newspaper, you should read your newspaper and buy your newspaper. Support local news and local news gathering. It's good for our democracy. Support a free press, and a free press is not free. Buy your newspaper.
What's black and white and red all over?
Black and white and red all over.
Newspaper.
Newspaper. I'm not sure that joke works anymore. I read so much of my news on the phone. So let's see, that's newspaper. The other wonderful bedding is that you'll have easy access to is cardboard.
We've got some wet cardboard soaking.
We have some wet cardboard soaking, and my favorite is I'll find a boyfriend who's and his meek little girlfriend, and I'll hand him dry cardboard and I'll hand her wet cardboard, and she'll be going zip, 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 because wet cardboard, zip, 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 and he's over there going So when you're shredding cardboard at home, the ways to do it, if you're doing it by hand, don't use scissors. Get it wet, tears real easily, okay? You can use your office shredder. If you've got a shredder at home, it will eat cardboard. Only run your shredder for about 5 minutes and then let it rest. If you run it and run it and run it, it'll burn out and you'll break your shredder. The other thing you do is lubricate your shredder. Take a piece of paper, piece of that cardboard, what have you, pour on some oil, okay? You can use a vegetable oil, an olive oil, or a mineral oil, or for that matter, a motor oil. There's not enough oil to hurt anybody, okay? Y'all will use vegetable oil because you love my worms and you're going to treat them nice. You run that every so often. I've seen people that do it every time they're going to do a big shred. They'll lubricate it first, or they'll lubricate it last. It helps the blade stay sharp. Helps the machine not burn out. Okay. In fact, as I recall, we have a little bit of shredded paper over here. So this looks to be some shredded office paper, and the worms are happy with it. I believe they have a supplier who is one of those industrial shredders. You can do this at home with your shredder. The smaller bits means the worms can eat faster. And I got a question coming. Question? So she saw me playing with this, and if you read it very carefully, you can see the printing on there. This used to be somebody's income taxes. So it's just paper. And so worms eat paper and they eat cardboard. Another question.
Question about, and if you are going to go over this, you can skip the question about storing it and heat. Like if I don't have a super shady area to store this.
So she's asking,
I know you talked
she's
about
asking where we put the bin. Okay? We're in wonderful Bay Area, so you can put the bin anywhere outside because humans can survive outside in San Jose all year long. The official numbers are 30 to 90 degrees Fahrenheit. And so you can put it anywhere outside, anywhere inside. The one limitation is if sunbeams touch your worm bin, it turns into a solar cooker. So wherever you put your worm bin, don't let it get hot sunbeams. If you get very early morning sunbeams or very late afternoon sunbeams, they'll be okay. But midday, they'll cook right away. They'll cook fast.
So it needs to be
In shade. Also put it near your kitchen. If it's far in the back of your backyard, you'll never go out there. So put it near to where you can get to it. Okay? So that's the bedding. We'll do that. We talked about the blanket. You'll find your blanket, whether you use the plastic bag or a baby blanket or the beloved bubble wrap. We talked about feeding to the corners. We talked about how wet it's going to be. Oh, I want to tell you about the mysterious disappearing newspaper. When we tear this up and we fill it with newspaper and we fill it with cardboard, we're going to fill it all the way up, and then you're going to wet it down. It'll shrink to next to nothing. Do that today. It'll shrink to next to nothing. Tomorrow morning, it'll be shrank some more. And so tomorrow, add more bedding. Okay? The first couple of days, add more bedding until you get it up to where it stays about 4 inches deep, 6 inches deep. Okay? That makes the worms happy to have 4 to 6 inches of bedding. Then after that, when you add food, we want to keep that balance. So when you add food, which is an N, also add some bedding, which is a C, the carbon, the C. So the browns and greens, you're trying to maintain a bed with food and worms in it. I know people that once they got started, they then added food and food and food and food and food, and the worms end up drowning in food. They want some bedding to keep it light. Okay? As your bin gets full and you're thinking, hey, I want to harvest some of this stuff, well, stop adding food, stop adding bedding. The only thing you add then is your fingers as you fluff it every so often, and that lets them finish off all that stuff you've been giving them and gives you that nice, wonderful there. We'll be...
Pretty obvious when your bin is ready to harvest.
Okay, so this question is always a cool question. When is the bin ready? Okay. At home, I've got bins that I've pushed them to be ready, where I feed them a while, and then I feed them only stuff that's finely ground, and then I stop feeding them and only fluff it, and I watch the moisture, and they get to where it's this stuff that looks like coffee grounds or a little cake crumb. And so those you can know they're ready. In your bin, it's hard to get to that point. And so when I teach the harvest, first method I teach in harvest is called just go for it. And that's where you take the stuff with the banana peels and the coffee grounds and all and put that in your garden. You know, worms and all in your garden. You can do that because that stuff will continue to compost in your garden. You want it more of the real harvestable stuff. And so then what we teach is doing a thing called horizontal migration. And so when it's mostly done and you see there's a whole lot of the worm poops in there, even though there's some lumps in there, what you do is you push all that to one side. You add fresh bedding to the empty side now, and you only feed on the stuff with the fresh bedding. Over time, the worms will move to the food and they'll move out of the sort of finished stuff. And since it's still only sort of finished, when you go to harvest that out of there, there will be worms. Catch them and drop them in the good side if you want to. There will be lumps. Take those out, put them into the feed side if you want to. And that's your easiest way to harvest, okay? I also sell a thing that I didn't bring today called the worm filter. The worm filter is just a mesh, and my mesh is a soft plastic mesh. And by putting fresh bedding down, and then my worm filter, and then my harvest, the worms see light, and they go, oh, I'm exposed, and they dive. And so after they've dived for about 10, 15 minutes, you can then take off the top layer, and there'll be no worms. So it's a real nice way to harvest. You take off that top layer, now you see a worm or two, so you stop, and those worms see the light again, and they dive again. And you just scrape down the layers, and that's the way to harvest without worms, okay? Like I said, if there's still lumps in there, you can take them out and put them back in, the lumps. I do that with a worm filter, which means they then crawl down, go through the filter and into the new stuff. You can do this in just a bin. And when they get down near the bottom, they kind of get crowded, and that tells you you've harvested enough and it's time to start feeding again. Question?
So we're going to take these home?
Say again?
Are we going to take these home?
Are we going to take these home? She's asking, are we taking bins home? And the answer is yes. Some people will have bins with worms in them, and some people were catching up to you and making sure you get worms the next couple of days. All right? So, what do you say we drill some holes in bins? Okay, thanks, y'all. Go ahead.
Can we compost and grow mushrooms at the same time?
Compost and grow mushrooms. You think you're being funny, but worms love eating fungus. One of my tricks when I want to harvest some little worms is I'll put some food and bedding into a plastic container with holes in it, right? And put that in the bed. And the worms will crawl in there to get at the food. What I've noticed is when I do that in a bin that doesn't have many worms, and the worms don't go into the little container, the container gets a little moldy. But that means that all that mold was growing, and the worms would crawl in there and eat the mold. Yeah. And so that means if you want to grow mushrooms, don't put worms in there. They're going to eat them before you do. All right, I'm going to turn off my camera. We're going to make some bins.